Hi, it's Michael Waits, and welcome to ATP Insights, where we cover the tech news that matters the most in Asia every week. Today is Friday, the 6th of February, 2026, and there's a lot to get to today. We're going to talk about Singapore announcing the creation of its national space agency. KKR-SingTel Consortium bought full control of ST Telemedia's global data center business, and there are just some global shifts going on that are positioning Southeast Asia as a key hub for data centers. Though those last two topics kind of overlap, we'll get into the details there as well. Let's talk about Singapore announcing the creation of its national space agency. So, what strategic role is NSAS going to play in Singapore's broader economy and innovation landscape? And I think really straightforward. I mean, you've seen all over the world, wherever there is something dedicated to space exploration, so much comes out of it. And I think this is designed in Singapore in particular as Singapore's central coordinating body for any of the space related stuff, any of the space related activities that they were thinking about. Its aim is really to boost Singapore's national capabilities in space technology, support the growth of a globally competitive space industry here. I think this is really important and help Singapore capture opportunities in a space economy that's expected to reach, yeah, sit down when you hear the number, $1.8 trillion by 2035. And it builds on some existing programs that Singapore also had, such as the Space Technology Development Program, and expands into operational capabilities, legislation, and some international partnerships, moving Singapore from kind of an incubating space system into a more strategic, globally integrated player. And I will say this, Singapore's done a really, really good job over time. If you go all the way back to 1965 and the formation of Singapore, and then watch its development from really like a small fishing village into a manufacturing economy, into a knowledge economy, into a tech economy. I think if Singapore puts its mind to the fact that it wants to build a space business, it's going to build a space business. So we already talked a little bit before about how it builds on some of the things that Singapore has already started to do. How does NAS expand the functions of existing agencies like the Office for Space Technology and Industry, so OSTI, as they call it in Singapore? Well, if you think that OSTI has kind of laid the groundwork in promoting space technology and industry development, then NSAS consolidates and kind of elevates these efforts into a dedicated national agency under the Ministry of Trade and Industry. So it's really just Singapore's way of saying, we've been thinking about this for a while. Now we're getting serious, right? And NSAS, which is what they're calling this, right? This is what the space agency is going to be called, is going to take on all of OSTI's functionality. It's going to strengthen research and development, support local companies, and probably regional companies would be my guess as well. And it's going to build partnerships and add new mandates as well to operate national space capabilities. I mean, imagine this. Singapore is one of the deepest water ports in Asia. It's one of the busiest ports in Asia as well. Imagine if they could add space launching functionality. We talked all this week on our other show, a global tech podcast on AGPT Daily, about how companies like SpaceX, Starlink, and Amazon all want to put like more and more satellites into space, but they're constrained by the inability to find enough rocket space and launch time to be able to do this. I don't know this for a fact, but imagine a place where Singapore now has one, two, three places to launch rockets in partnership, let's say even with SpaceX or with Starship, and they want to help companies or countries put satellites into space. I think this is really cool. They want to manage satellite tasks and some kind of geospatial analytics, right? So maybe it's not just building rockets, but maybe it's building analysis, using artificial intelligence to analyze and manage what's already going on in space. And maybe, who knows, maybe even like have a moon launch. We saw India do this before. So India is building a gigantic space business as well. And from a strategic perspective, my first time in Singapore was 1990. And I'll tell you that it has changed a lot in that time as well. But Singapore is like the driving force from a technological standpoint for all of Southeast Asia. I wouldn't necessarily say for all of Asia, but boy, it is the connective tissue, right? For what's going on, let's just say in Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. It sits right in the middle there. And then for the rest of Asia as well, it's always been kind of that connective tissue. And if it's building this sort of forward looking space legislation that's pro innovation and pro business, I think it's good for the entire region as well. So, what are some of the practical applications, some of the more specific applications of Singapore's space strategy for national, and I already mentioned this, right, and for regional needs? Well, just beyond scientific exploration, their strategy includes operational roles, as I said, that supports digital connectivity. Again, we talked about it, putting satellites in space to provide internet connectivity, navigation, right? So maybe planes use some of this stuff, Earth monitoring. So just being able to look down and have a way in Asia to use its own satellites. I think this is really important, right? We did spend a lot of time on the other show, right, on HTTP Daily saying the world is trifurcating. And if the world is trifurcating, meaning that you're having sort of like this West, Europe, and Asian thing happening in the world, well, then Asia needs its own ability. And I think they'll probably partner with India as well to be able to do all these things in space, right? Environmental resilience, food security, all these things like that, that satellites and space exploration and space science can actually help us do. And by coordinating sorry, by coordinating satellite imagery, tasking, and geospatial analytics, the agency aims to apply space tech directly to policy priorities and economic activities. I think this is really important as well, making what's going on in space or the space business itself more relevant to everyday problems for both Singapore and for regional partners. And think about this too. Everywhere there's been a space business, it's led to innovation. This is not new information. Just the technical knowledge that's necessary to run a business in space and the research and development and the scientific stuff that gets developed by existing in space, by building things for space, by understanding what's happening in space, and then bringing that stuff down to Earth, whether it's miniaturization, whether it's batteries, whether it's solar energy, whether it's microwave, all these things come out of the space program. The original space program in the United States, right, from NASA and some of the other stuff that they did for the moon launches. But if Singapore can bring that stuff to Asia, you don't know what kind of innovation is going to come out of it. And to be fair, by building partnerships, not just locally, but regionally with regional universities in India, in Japan, and even the very strong technical universities in Singapore, the benefits to not just Singapore, but to the whole region, I think are huge. And how will this new space agency influence international collaboration and Singapore's position in the global space ecosystem? I think this is really clear, right? Right now with OSTI, so there have been some space stuff coming out of Singapore and hence coming out of Asia, but the more serious, right, that Singapore gets in its desire and its ability to gain knowledge and gather research and do exploration, just the more important it's going to be in the global space business. And not just from a geopolitical standpoint, which I do and I kind of don't care about, but just from a, hey, we have all this knowledge, we can share that knowledge, and it's just going to deepen the partnerships. They're going to be more useful to the rest of the world with other major space agencies and other major space organizations, including the European Space Agency. India, I already mentioned Space Agency. The UAE is doing the same thing. Everybody's interested in space. It's interesting in a way to me, right? Because there's plenty of, I don't want to say space, but there's plenty of room and unused land on Earth. But humans are natural travelers and explorers, right? And this goes all the way back to like the Spanish Armada and all these sort of exploration that people wanted to do through the oceans. And now I think people are just getting more interested in more because technology is becoming more prevalent. Everybody wants to go to space. You know, we did talk about Elon Musk's thing, like he wanted to be on Mars in 5 years. Clearly, that did not happen. It's probably not going to happen. It's probably way further away than that by now for sure. But even regional bodies like Thailand's GISDA, they want to be involved in the space business too. And I think, again, humans are natural explorers and they want to explore the heavens. And to be fair, the better technology gets, the further away from Earth we can go, past like the space station that's been up there for I don't know how long, that was built in conjunction with the U.S. and the Russians, but also the International Space Station, right? Maybe Singapore can go up there and do some research that others have not considered. But I think this makes Singapore way more useful and feel way more important in the context of the global world. And for someone who's lived in Asia for 35 years, it has to make you proud. And it also enhances Singapore's role as a trusted hub for space services in ASEAN and the rest of the world. And again, they did this in manufacturing, they did it in banking and finance, they're doing it in technology and startups, in venture capital. And if they say they're going to do it in space, they will. So, what are some of the long term challenges and opportunities Singapore has to address just to make this whole thing useful? I think this is really, I mean, this is obvious, right? Some of the key opportunities leveraging Singapore's strengths in advanced manufacturing, which we talked about. They've been in the manufacturing business for 6 decades. Singapore knows how to do like complex things. Aerospace, AI. Singapore, by the way, if you've never been to Changi Airport, I say aerospace, right? But it just reminds me, if you've never been to Changi Airport, you've never had the best airport experience in the whole world. And part of it is the way they've organized the airport, but part of it is the way that Singapore thinks about things differently than everybody else. And if they do the same thing in space that they've done in aerospace and airplanes and airport management, they're going to make a gigantic difference, right? They're really good at artificial intelligence. I will say this, even though Manus AI was not a Singaporean company, originally a Chinese company, but moving into Singapore to kind of get the benefits of being connected to the entire world, because China tends to be kind of a closed ecosystem. And because the Chinese market is so large on its own, the sort of necessity for Chinese companies to expand outside of a country with 1.2 to 1.3 billion people, right, means that when a company domains itself into a place like Singapore, besides the fact that Singapore operates on English law, which means that the rest of the world now is free to invest in these types of companies that are being built in Singapore, but also the expectations about how these companies are going to behave, and if there are any issues with the companies, everybody in the world understands English law, right? So any sort of dispute can get fixed there easier than it can maybe in other parts of the world because English law here is very well understood. There's a gigantically skilled talent pool. I did talk earlier about how great the Singaporean universities, whether it's SMU or NUS, so that's the National University of Singapore, Singapore Management University, if you don't know what the acronyms stand for. Um, but having space studies going on there and having this relationship with the space program at NSAS is going to be a two-way street of benefit between the agency itself and also everything that's going on at the university level and just the local internal partnerships. Um, it's gonna make space services commercially viable and sustainable as well. And look, like I said, Singapore's been very, very successful through some government policy actions across the board, across industries where they've tried to be good and better. And you may have noticed that whether it's the UAE or other countries that had developing economies, I'm not saying the UAE has a developing economy now, very strong financially, very well managed. In the old days, went to Singapore to find out like what they were doing right and to try to understand best practices. Singapore is very good at organizing this kind of stuff. And Singapore, where it sits in the world, is everybody in the world is friendly with Singapore, right? And that's going to help benefit it as well. But if Singapore can become a central hub, particularly in the region, for the entire space business, not just for space exploration, but for space intelligence, like I said, even for satellite launches or even just for just understanding space science and research, this is going to be a really big deal for Singapore. Okay, let's move on to topic number 2, and that is KKR, right? So this is actually really important as well, and we're going to do this in a two-pronged way. So KKR-SingTel Consortium bought full control of ST Telemedia's global data centers. And let's just think about this. Like, what's the significance of this? And what's the significance for the data center industry in Southeast Asia? Well, the acquisition, right, from KKR and Singapore Singtel will pay 6.6 billion Singapore dollars. So just take 75% of that, because that's where the Sing dollar US dollar rate is approximately, to acquire the remaining 82% of STTGDC, so the global data center business, making it the largest data center deal in Southeast Asia and Singapore's biggest infrastructure transaction in years. This is really, really significant. And it underscores, I think, things that we were talking about in the context of the space industry, but just how digital infrastructure, especially AI ready capacity, has become just a strategic asset driving investment flows in the region. We spent a lot of time talking about, we did mention Manus AI as well. There is a really, really good talent pool of AI engineers in Singapore, but not just in Singapore, in the whole region. And building these AI data centers, we talked about this, right? NVIDIA, we talked about it on AGTP Daily. NVIDIA wants to build these vertically integrated AI data centers SpaceX wants to do the same thing. XAI wants to do the same thing, right? Elon Musk is talking about this. The data center business, which seems like this sleepy old thing maybe 5 years ago, I think it's just about to explode. And this gets into like the next thing that I would ask is like, why are private equity and telecom players so keen to own data centers now? Well, again, they are essential. They're core to powering next generation AI applications, cloud computing, all these things that matter in enterprise digital services. And there is so much digital transformation happening again, not just in Singapore, but being driven out of there into the rest of the region, whether that's in Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, even bleeding into Japan as well. And as demand for AI, what's the right word, workloads expands, and hyperscale computing becomes more important, investors like KKR are looking globally, not just in the United States, but for digital infrastructure as a long term sort of structural advantage and a growth theme. And again, I don't think this is going to end. I think we're right at the beginning of this stuff. I say a lot that we're at the early innings of this AI war that's going to go on, and these data centers are going to be core to part of this AI war that's going to happen. And they really want to SingTel itself, right, as a telecom, accelerates its transformation from just like a phone company, a traditional telco, which there's nothing wrong with that business. Everywhere in the world, the telco business is a great business, particularly as the pipes for internet and data dissemination around the world. But if you want to be this sort of integrated digital infrastructure operator that has a global reach, well, then data centers are going to be a core part of doing that. What does it mean for Singtel's strategic position business model? So KKR is just in the investment business, but Singapore actually operates and runs like a day-to-day business that's really important. And by increasing its stakes, Singtel significantly deepens exposure to data center infrastructure, complementing its existing connectivity and telecom offerings. We talked about this, right? So the idea is that they're already in the connectivity business, they're already in the data business. But the more they're in the data business, the more they can learn from it, the more they can get better at it, the more they can accelerate the growth in that business. And then the more they can be involved in these AI, these very specific AI data center businesses. I mean, boy, if you combine what's happening in the National Space Agency of Singapore, so the NSAS, with Singtel's acquisition of this data center business, and you think about NVIDIA wanting to be vertically integrated, right? Microsoft building AI chips, Google building AI chips, Apple building AI chips. Across the board, we've been talking about this. Positron coming into this business and saying they want to be in the AI chip business for inference. Who's to say that Singtel, which if they're expanding now into this sort of physical hardware business, wouldn't at some point say, we own all these data centers. How can we make the data centers better? Singapore has a very large research and development budget. And like I said earlier, when they put their mind to something, it's hard for them not to accomplish it. How unshocking would it be if Singtel, in some kind of partnership with a chip maker, said, and remember, TSMC is not that far away. I know it's in Taiwan, and in China, but it's not that far away. Singapore, a Mandarin speaking country, so well versed in its ability to talk to the people that are actually making chips. Who's to say that Singapore at some point is not going to get into the chip making business as a way to, have some kind of technological sovereignty? I just think it's really interesting when you think about just these little acquisitions, not little, but these little kind of sliding door moments. Who knows what they're going to generate or what they're going to birth after this? What other opportunities are going to come from this? Now, how will this acquisition affect the competitive landscape for data centers in the Asia Pacific region? Well, I mean, this enlarged platform, right, that Singtel is putting together with the help of KKR, it already exists in 12 major markets across Asia, Europe, and the UK, and it could become one of the most significant data center operators serving hyperscalers, and enterprise clients in the world. Again, if you look at what we talked about earlier with NSAS and how it's going to position Singapore globally as a great partner, as a significant partner for other people in the space business, you have to believe that the same thing is going to happen in the data center business, which is going to become more and more important in the AI businesses, but also in the space business as well. Imagine how much data is gathered. And I don't know if Singapore has its own satellites, but boy, if they don't already, they will. And think about how much data they'll need and they'll have to gather, and they'll continue to gather at scale by running these data center businesses. And then think about what role artificial intelligence is going to play. And then think about partnering with the NSAS So they have data sovereignty. Maybe they build bespoke data centers for them. This is a gigantic opportunity, not just locally, but regionally and globally. And the backing of capital from KKR, right? So KKR is not going to just stop investing, not going to buy the business and walk away. KKR are very sophisticated investors as well and have been around for a long time, right? Kohlberg, Kravertz, and Roberts have been around for a long time. It's unlikely to me that if this partnership needs more money or needs more investment money, the KKR is going to be there and allow for much more ambitious and aggressive expansion and capacity build outs, not just in the region, excuse me, but raising the competitive bar for rivals targeting AI and cloud workloads in the region. This is going to be a very significant investment over time. And if people aren't talking about it yet, they'll definitely talk about it after listening to this discussion on the show. Nothing's easy, and every new business venture or every sort of what's the right expansion in business has risks associated with it. And while demand for and this one will have it too. So what types of risks are associated with this type of large infrastructure deal? Besides just the fact that you have to manage this business on a day-to-day basis, but what other risks are there or could there be? Well, while demand for AI ready infrastructure is growing, it's robust. Um, we talked about it a lot on our other show. Operating data centers at scale is capital intensive. I've already mentioned that. It's going to require more money with significant ongoing cost for power, cooling. You're going to need, if you're expanding, you're going to need places to put these data centers. Are you going to negotiate with Malaysia, with Thailand, with Indonesia, with Vietnam, with the Philippines, with Borneo, which has great water power? We'll talk about that in a bit as well. But all these other countries in the region say, look, we run this business. How can we partner together to make this better, not just for us, but for all of us together? And as I said earlier, when we talked about the space business, Singapore has been very, very good at doing that. Let's get to our third topic, which is some global shifts are taking place that are actually going to accelerate what's happening in the data center business in Southeast Asia. And I want to talk in more specific terms, less about the specific deal and more just about data centers in general and why Southeast Asia could be a key hub for them. So, why is it emerging as a strategic hub? Well, its rise as a data center hub, it's not new, but it's driven by some converging trends. Booming AI and cloud demand locally and globally, rapid digital transformation and digital adoption across agencies, and increasing investments by hyperscale tech firms in the region. Right there, and not just in the region where we already mentioned that the data center business that SingTel was buying is operating in 12 countries, not all of them in Asia, but just in general in Asia, you see you see countries and the businesses in those countries, whether it is Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, all going through this massive digital transformation. I see it every single day, no matter where I travel. And frankly, because I've been in the region for 35 years, I see these like incremental changes that I know are going to lead to much larger changes. And there's some global geopolitical tensions and some supply chain issues that are being reconfigured as well. We talked earlier about trifurcation in the world, right? Where this Western bloc with the US, Europe, and then China. Okay. And I think the world is going to continue to trifurcate over the next like 30 to 35 years, I think for sure. And because of that, what happens in Southeast Asia? Southeast Asia is kind of like a peaceful place, if you don't mind me saying. And I think that increasingly you're going to see companies want to come here including companies diversing away from overlines on single regions, right? So in other words, if some company already has a data center in Cincinnati, I don't know why I keep going back to Cincinnati, or in Texas, and they have one like in Europe and then in the UK, well, then they're going to want to have data centers in Southeast Asia as well, in places where land is available, land is cheap, and we'll get to that too. But I think that the region's relatively neutral geopolitical stance, as I mentioned, right? I said it was really peaceful here. Lower costs, strong connectivity, and evolving local data localization laws. I think enhances the appeal of building a data center in Asia. And to be fair, who doesn't want to travel here and start the building process? I've lived here for a long time now. It's awesome here. Um, how does the geopolitics influence the growth of data centers in Southeast Asia? And again, I'm not what's the right word? I'm not supporting any particular view here. I'm just saying that the world is in flux. And it's shaping Southeast Asia's data center landscape in multiple ways. Nations around the world, we talked about this, are grappling with data sovereignty and security issues, and Southeast Asia offers a geopolitically neutral environment, very neutral out here, um, for storing and processing data outside of the two other places where the trifurcation is taking place, right? Without mentioning what it is. Countries in the region are also implementing digital sovereignty rules and regulatory frameworks, as we talked about a couple of days ago on the other show, and it's going to require companies and countries to host their data locally. So for countries today that are hosting or using data centers outside the region, it's going to be a boon and a boom in data center construction out here, getting back to the thing we talked about with SingTel acquiring that other business, but more generally saying we're just going to need more data centers in Southeast Asia. And because it's a geopolitically neutral place for that, you're going to have foreign country companies coming in and doing it, but also locally in countries where data sovereignty is going to be really important. That's going to happen here as well, and I think you're going to see a boom in the building of data centers and the management of data centers in the region. So, what are some of the competitive advantages that Southeast Asia has to offer with other established markets like the U.S., Europe, or even Eastern Asia? So, not just labor costs, but power costs are lower. Like you would die if you knew what my electricity bill was in my apartment. It would kill you. And what my water bill is. Yeah, you would scream. With burgeoning demand driven by mobile first economies, right? So in Thailand, where I live, but also in Vietnam and in the rest of the region, it's a mobile first economy. Everybody, like mobile phone penetration is so high. I've actually seen some people walking around with two or three mobile phones. And just the amount of data that gets created off these mobile phones alone is voluminous. And what that means is that there's this massive cloud adoption. And while we have spoken to companies out here like Agoda that go back and forth between how much of our stuff do we want in the cloud, how much do we want to have on prem, I think what most companies are finding is that like the hybrid solution is the solution that they're going to go with. And it means that as just more and more data gets created, more and more data centers, more and more stuff in the cloud, um, and the other thing as well, I mentioned some of these other countries, but Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines. I see data centers going up in Thailand a lot, actually. And some of the governments are actually offering incentives to build them in their countries. That's not a big surprise, and I don't think that that's gonna end. And they're also building regulatory frameworks to help the hyperscalers operate and invest in their countries, right? So Thailand recently approved billions of dollars in data center and cloud investments, and if you've never been to Thailand, it's hard to explain just how progressive the government and the regulators are. They are constantly looking overseas and thinking, what are the best practices? Where is the global economy going? And I've got to be honest with you, it's super impressive. We talked about how great what's happening in Singapore is. I've lived in Thailand for 15 years now. It's a pretty amazing place when it comes to, manufacturing, warehousing, distribution, port management, and also technology management. No, what's happening in Thailand is nothing sort of spectacular. And I think that unlike mature markets where land and power are really expensive, Thailand in particular, but Southeast Asia in general, provides a really lower cost base for building new capacity. And it's crucial, right, for the hyperscalers and also for AI, as service providers need expansion, need a place to put this in a place that's reasonable. And, like I said, Thailand in particular, because I live there, but the rest of the region in general is just a perfect place for this. And again, just getting back to the relative inexpense related to power and water means that cooling for a data center is actually going to be way less expensive in Southeast Asia than it would be in more mature markets like the United States and Western Europe. But as we said earlier, nothing's for free. So, what are some of the challenges of making Southeast Asia a hub for data centers? Um, there are sustainability challenges and there are resource challenges as well. So you really have to decide like where are we going to put them and how are we going to make it so that if we build a gigantic data center or a hub of data centers, then it's not going to be bad for the environment. We did say that they take a lot of electricity and water, and we do run the risk, as you've seen in the United States, the more AI data centers you build, particularly in the regions where those data centers get built, the price of water and the price of electricity go up. So let's see how that gets managed out here, right? Um, But I'm kind of bullish on the fact that the governments out here are going to figure out a way in partnership with private companies. They'll figure out a way to keep it reasonable for their local populations as well, particularly as this stuff gets built out. Um, and as I said, I think if you've never been to the region, your image of what the region is like and the reality here, I think, are night and day. You would be shocked if you knew, like I have gigabit Ethernet at home, right? I have 5G everywhere. No matter where you go in the country that I live in, Thailand, I have 5G. And as soon as 6G comes out, we'll have 6G everywhere. The telcos and the digital infrastructure, again, in Thailand in particular, but in the region in general, I mean, Singapore, obviously. But for a lot of people that haven't been to the region, I think you'd be shocked about how great connectivity is. And if you think of connectivity and like Wi-Fi connectivity and internet connectivity as a proxy for sort of digital infrastructure, I think you'd be surprised just how amazing it is. Really, really amazing. In other words, like I have people that I work with in Thailand and Singapore and Vietnam or whatever, and they go to Europe and they just think like, where is my internet connectivity? Why is it so slow? And why is it so hard to get? Because when they come home, it's blazing fast and it's ubiquitous, right? And countries in Southeast Asia, you can use Malaysia as an example, are constantly updating their digital infrastructure. And you'd just be shocked at how great it is. Now, you do run the risk at some level that there may be some talent shortages out here, but I will say this, for every talent shortage, there's a guy or a gal living in the Western world who says, I can get a job in Southeast Asia. I'm there, if for no other reason than the weather. There's nothing like waking up in 30-degree weather every single day. Um, and the last question I would ask myself here is, how is the data center surge in Southeast Asia reshaping or impacting the region's role in the global digital value chains? And I think it's really straightforward. As the world trifurcates, but also as the economies in Southeast Asia continue to develop at kind of breakneck speed, it's reshaping, sorry, global digital value chains, and it's creating alternative infrastructure to the rest of the world. Stuff that's going on in North America, stuff that's going on in East Asia, stuff that's going on in Europe. And the more we have the ability to build out digital infrastructure here, it's going to foster regional connectivity in a way that hasn't been done yet. But think about what it would mean for payments. So let's say you have all this digital infrastructure. You have India UPI, you have Prompt Pay in Thailand, you have Pay Now in Singapore. If you build out all these data centers, you get all this digital connectivity, well, then you're going to get this. And I want to talk about this actually on a separate show, because I do think that payments and connecting the digital infrastructure in Southeast Asia is a thing. But if it starts with the data centers and data center connectivity, I think it's going to be really, really important for whole hosts of the things that are going on in the digital infrastructure world in Southeast Asia, but also in the whole world. And all of this stuff is going to provide better sort of computing experiences for end users, but it's also going to be super vital for artificial intelligence and moving from centralized kind of data models to multi-hub regional networks. And I think it's going to enhance resilience against any kind of disruptions that you may have if the data centers aren't regionally localized and they're being used or they're being put in place for data centers that are now being used outside of the region. Having them in region, I think, is just going to be super beneficial. Okay, I'm going to let everybody go. Just again, to go over what we covered, Singapore announced the creation of its national space agency, really important. KKR-SingTel Consortium bought full control of ST Telemedia's global data center business, operating in 12 countries, not just in Southeast Asia. And what are global shifts are positioning Southeast Asia as a key hub for data centers? I think actually all these things going together are going to be really important. Follow the Asia Tech Podcast on YouTube and subscribe. Like this video if you like it. Tell your friends about it. Follow us on all the socials. You can see us on LinkedIn. You can see us on X or Twitter, depending on how you want to call it. And look for us on Instagram as well. Have a great weekend and look for the show again next week. It's Michael Waits. Bye for now.